Welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 190, which is a really great group chat that was had with Dan Park, who's the CEO of Clutch. Clutch is one of the largest online marketplaces for buying and selling used cars in Canada. Prior to joining Clutch as the CEO, Dan led Uber Eats in Canada, so some really great marketplace experience. So this is a really great chat with Dan, where he started off by sharing about his previous experience leading Uber Eats in Canada and some of his key learnings. What led him to joining Clutch as the CEO, how it's evolved and scaled. We did a deep dive into his leading marketplace for buying and selling used cars today, got to learn about the recent growth, discussed topics like considerations when building managed marketplaces. Dan shared some of his key fundraising learnings, and we also had a great group Q&A. I really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So, Dan, as I mentioned to you right before we started recording, Clutch has been coming up in the community more recently. You've been highly requested at a group chat guest. So, I'm really excited to have you join us here today. I want to start off by saying huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. We have a lot that we're going to dive into with all of your awesome marketplace experience and also Clutch. But I thought it'd be great if you could start off by briefly sharing a background for those here that might not know you.
Sure, happy to, and thanks for having me on, Mike. So started my career in finance. Didn't know I was going to be a tech guy, but really started gravitating towards tech when I was doing investment banking M&A. Eventually transitioned into venture capital, and when I was in VC, I always felt like a little bit of an imposter. Relatively early in my career, trying to give founders advice on how to run businesses without having actually run one myself. I think being a VC is tough. I enjoyed it. It was a fun job, but I always felt like I was missing something. And so back in 2016, Uber had just started experimenting with different models outside of moving humans around. And Travis was still there back then, and he kind of asked the question to the team, if we can get a car to someone in 5 minutes, what else could we deliver to customers? And so I was hired in to lead a business called Uber Everything at the time, which ironically wasn't everything. It was everything that wasn't rides, which was nothing. And there was a bunch of different products at the time. Eats was a part of it, as was a business called Rush, which was more like package delivery. And in 2016, it was still pretty early in the Uber Eats evolution. Um, the model back then was still largely in the Uber Eats app, where you could order, a sandwich or a pad thai, and they would come to your door. But the options were very limited, and so it was like, instead of us seeing the Uber X button, there was like a food button, and that was the initial iteration was kind of crazy. It was called Uber Instant at the time. And every morning we'd go and we'd fill these Ubers with a pretty small selection of menu items, and we'd meet them in a parking lot, and we'd literally stuff hundreds of sandwiches or hundreds of pad thais or hundreds of whatever it is into these Ubers. They would drive around, and then if you wanted that for lunch, you'd press a button and it would show up in literally 10 minutes. Um, the problem with that, it was just very unscalable, and it required a lot of coordination, and inventory management was a nightmare because some of the drivers would run out of their item within an hour or two, and others would drive around for the entire day and not sell out of their item. And so those would all come back to our office, and if it was, you know I don't know, pad thai for lunch, and that didn't sell out, like, the entire office was having pad thai for dinner. And so that's when the Uber Eats app started becoming something that we needed to develop. And so that was actually built in Toronto. So I'm based in Toronto. A team of developers flew in, sat in a room for 2 months, built the Uber Eats app. We launched it out of Toronto globally, and kind of the rest is history. But that was, it was. I was there during a time of pretty intense scaling. We put a bunch of the enterprise customers like McDonald's and A&W and Starbucks. It was a big question mark at the time whether or not people really wanted fast food delivered. And we went from, in Canada, we went from, basically a couple thousand orders a month to millions of orders, sorry, a couple of thousand orders a week to a million orders a week. And then, DoorDash and obviously Uber Eats in the US, and like all these other food delivery businesses started taking off. Um, and that's when so I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. It was, scaled from zero to $3 billion in GMV under my P&L within 3 years. And then my decision was, do I continue at Uber, and where being in Canada in a satellite office, the next decision point was to go back to San Francisco. I'd lived in San Francisco. It's a great place, but I'd moved my family already, and I'm Canadian, and so I was happy in Toronto. I had probably another year or two left at Uber, but it was this really cool opportunity around used cars, and I met someone that was on the board of Clutch. He called me up and said, "Hey, look, like you're delivering food. Maybe you should deliver cars instead." And despite not being the same thing, there are some similarities. People uh, people want convenience, and they want things delivered quickly, and that was certainly lacking in used car sales. And so started on this journey back in 2019. And could talk a little bit about that, but that's been, quite the roller coaster ride, given the pandemic, given now tariffs, given the lack of growth equity in 2022 and 2023, and just the physical nature of the product we're providing, certainly adds complexity to any marketplace, and specifically ours.
Yeah, it's a really great background. So, thanks for sharing with us. And a lot we're going to get into, but it was really cool to hear some of the early Uber Eats kind of stories. But going back to your time there, I'm sure there were lots of challenges and learnings. But what would you say some of your key learnings were that you've taken with you to Clutch?
Uber was very good at throwing um, people at problems. And what I mean by that is a lot of people default to product and building product to solve problems. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes you can make, because product is expensive. It's cheaper now than it was maybe that back then, but it's hard to build. And generally, you don't really know what you're building until you actually operationalize it first. And so a good example was that early days at Uber, there was no mechanism for anyone to manage the marketplace, meaning supply and demand, right? And so without some kind of market regulating mechanism, your marketplace is out of whack, and you get angry customers. You get food that's being prepared, piling up at restaurants with no one to pick them up. The consumers are unhappy and hangry because they want their food. And so we didn't have any tools to be able to actually manage that marketplace. And the only tool we had was the radius, the delivery radius of the restaurant. It started off being manual. I remember New Year's Eve was a 2020, no, 20, New Year's Eve 20, probably 2018. My team would take shifts, and I remember I took like because I was the GM and I had to show leadership. I took like the 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. shift, and you sit there in front of me. I was at a friend's party. I was like on my computer managing the radius of different restaurants to make sure that the demand and supply was like at equilibrium. So it took a while for us to build tools, but until we actually knew how that tool was supposed to work, it was really hard to build product. And so the next evolution of that was like, it was our team managing it. Then we actually outsourced it to a team in the Philippines that had these like plugins that would automatically tell you which, based on weather. And we had one computer running like a Google Sheet that the team in the Philippines would use, and have this like, I have this computer picture of a computer says, "Don't turn this computer off." This like manages the entire Uber Eats system, globally. And then, we did that. And then eventually over time, as we got to a point where we were scaled, that this system that we put in place with these outsourced folks in the Philippines, then, we were able to build product around that. But like, if you kind of like rush to the product solution first, you waste a lot of time and money and energy building something that you don't actually know what you need. And so, a big takeaway from my time is it's okay to do really manual processes before you build product. And in fact, I think that's the best way to build product, because it teaches you what you have to build. And then from there, you can actually use that to build the right product for the right problem, whether it's consumer facing or whether it's back end. And so I think a lot of people take for granted the ability to take existing tools, or half of our play. I have Clutch. we ran, I would say like our entire supply acquisition on an Airtable for a really long time. It was messy, it was broken, Airtable would always break. But then you get to a point where, okay, well, you know exactly what you need to build and you build it. And, you get to a point where you realize, okay, this is not scalable, but it's good enough. It's good enough, right? And I think good enough is actually good enough for a long time.
No, certainly. Those are some great learnings. I'm sure that might lead to some questions we can get to the group Q&A as well. So transitioning to Clutch, what led you to joining Clutch, and where was the business at as far as like the stage when you joined?
Yeah, it was pre-seed. It was super early. We launched one market. Carvana was just kind of emerging back then in the US. And a lot of other players globally. And this is not the first time this idea had ever been kind of executed on. BP, from like probably 15 years ago at this point, was kind of the first, I would say, real version of like a managed car marketplace. And there's actually a TechCrunch article on it about managed marketplaces that talks about BP. And I think there were some lessons to be learned there, but when Clutch was early, I joined really one market launched. And um, for those that don't know exactly how the business works, and the current version of the model really takes advantage. And so, kind of going back to, I would say 2020 and 2021, a lot of VCs and, when I was out raising growth equity, there was two very distinct camps. There were those that thought I should be owning all of the assets, and those that wanted asset light. And people had very strong opinions about both models. And as a result, there were companies globally. There's a bunch of us types of businesses around the globe. There were those that kind of pursued the more asset light model, and those that pursued the more vertically integrated kind of heavy infrastructure models. And kind of at the time, it wasn't as obvious. Today, now it's quite obvious. But at the time, a lot of the folks that didn't own their assets had to outsource a lot of the kind of value add services that would take place because we are a managed marketplace. And so, kind of distilling it back. So, our business, what we do is we buy cars directly from consumers, and we use a lot of technology to do that. So today we buy about $2 million worth of cars every day, take those and we put those on our balance sheet, and that's kind of the managed marketplace piece of it because we take the risk of the inventory. And then we have these large, I'm sitting in one of our largest reconditioning facilities. It's on 20 acres. It's 111,000 square feet of space where we then do actual work to the car. We recondition that car, oil change, air filters, um, cosmetic work. We do transmission work, tires, brakes. So we do the full suite of reconditioning. And then we put that on a website for consumers to buy and like very seamless Amazon-like experience. And the crux of the business model is that if folks have not, I'll refrain from, commenting on Elon or whatever, but if you've read his book, there's a concept in Elon's book that talks about the idiot index. And it's the notion that if there's a product where the cost of the goods are far lower than the actual price of the product, then like the idiot index is high, right? You shouldn't be paying that much for that thing because either there's inefficiencies in the supply chain or there's, something, you're not sourcing it properly, or there's like, processes are not efficient. And so in car repair, that's certainly true, right? If you go and try to get a dented bumper fixed, it's going to cost you anywhere between like $2,000 to $4,000, right? But the actual inputs of that are actually quite cheap. Some paint, a little bit of labor, and then the plastic and some steel, right? Like that's the cost. And if you go to your local dealership and try to get service done, the cost they're going to charge you 200 to, well, in Canada, $200 an hour, or probably $150 an hour in the US for labor. And so what we're able to do is we're able to put $1,000 to $1,000 to $1,500 of reconditioning into the vehicle. But the retail value of that is almost 4 to 5x. And so that allows us to recondition those at scale, recondition those cars at a much cheaper cost, which allows us to buy and give consumers a better price for their car than any dealership. And then so we can pay more, we can recondition cheaper, and then offer a better product at either the same or lower price back to the consumer. Right. So that's like where the value add comes in. And so that's the crux of the model. over time, owning that reconditioning and the full vertical integration of that is what creates value. And so as a result, it's pretty hard to do this model asset light because you need the control over that core piece of the business. It also allows you to deliver a superior customer experience, allows you to control and maintain costs. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that makes a lot of sense. And so what you've seen in the world is the companies that have pursued the more vertically integrated, like asset heavy model have actually emerged as the winners and those that haven't. And so in the US, companies like Vroom and Shift that were less asset heavy are now gone by the wayside. And Carvana has this massive advantage because they have one, they own all of this land and space, or at least have access to all this land and space, but also built these massive reconditioning centers. And so that's our advantage as well, and allows us to really deliver I think a superior customer experience by being able to own the full value chain around reconditioning.
That's going to be a really helpful note. You also mentioned lots of topics as far as like, asset heavy versus asset light marketplaces that we're always discussing here. And I guess for, a little bit of context, could you kind of like walk us through, what the experience is like as far as like, buying and selling through Clutch?
Yeah, so buying, selling a car to us is super easy. Our NPS on the sell is like something like 90 plus. We've built, and this is where we spent the bulk of our energy around technologies, around building machine learning models for each make and model of car that allows a customer to come in, put in their license plate information, and for us to generate an instant cash offer for their vehicle. And so, if as long as you're somewhat truthful around the quality of your vehicle, which most customers are, we will generate and honor the price of that car. And so that's our supply funnel, and that allows us to basically. And I think you have to invest in some. You have to understand where the pain points are in your. In the U.S., I would say supply is actually harder to get, and so there's probably an over subsidization of supply in the U.S. But it kind of depends on where you are. For us, the part where the supply market is less penetrated and allows us to then really easily scale up the supply side. And then where a lot of our constraints are frankly around the production. And so taking that supply and taking the raw material, which is a car that someone doesn't want for whatever reason, and then making that a car that's very desirable because we put a bunch of work and money into it. And so on the supply side, we built technology that allows us to price and offer a dollar value for that vehicle instantaneously. And it took us some time to figure that out. Again, a lot of these things seem very obvious in hindsight, but for us, it took us a long time to figure out that the addressable market for supply was actually bigger than the addressable market for demand. And what I mean by that is we were spending a lot of money advertising and marketing on the buy side, but the problem is on the buy side, if you only have an inventory of, let's say, 2,000 cars, the chances are, selection is so important for any marketplace. So if you're actually trying to attract that consumer on the buy side, then you need to have the exact, and every car that we have is unique, right? No two used cars are the same. And so you have to have that exact car at the right time, at the right price, with the right condition that customer wants. And if you don't have that car, as much as you might like Clutch as a platform, you're probably not going to buy from us. Whereas on the supply side, our addressable market is anyone that has a car, right? That wants to sell a car, right? And so the TAM is effectively much bigger on the supply side. And if you can generate more supply, that helps the demand side because you have more selection. And so we pivoted a lot of our marketing towards the supply side. And so 70 to 80% of our marketing dollars now go towards supply acquisition. When we first started, we were actually acquiring cars from auctions. And so we weren't really truly a marketplace in that regard. We were more of like a retailer because we buy from the wholesale auction and then mark up. But there was never, because that was the model, there wasn't a lot of margin in that business, but it allowed us to scale really quickly, right? It allowed us to scale and effectively build the supply side of the marketplace faster than you could through the consumer acquisition. But the consumer acquisition is a better quality product. And so over time, we shifted from almost 90% wholesale acquisition to 90 almost 98%, 99% consumer acquisition. So that was a big evolution for our business, and pivoting from the how we buy cars was a big factor, and I would say a lot of our more recent success. But it took a lot of work, and so that was kind of the supply piece of it. And then the demand side was that, if you have good cars at good prices, it kind of like solves itself, right? Because we can market not only um, uh, through the more traditional channels, but we can do more targeted like SEO around like, okay, we have you uh Toyota Camrys or Toyota or SEM for that matter, like 19 or not it, like 2024 Toyota Camry, and we can kind of buy those search terms, and we can list those cars on things like Car Gurus as well. So if you got the supply, then the demand is a lot easier.
Certainly. And a related topic is expansion and growth. So how do you approach expansion and growth at Clutch?
One of our investors is FJ Labs, who's like pretty notoriously heavy into marketplaces. And Fabrice, like early on, was like, nail it before you scale it, right? And I think that's like a very good piece of advice. I didn't take it. And we kind of scaled like crazy before our unit economics really made any sense. And that was because we had a customer, like, sorry, a competitor that was really nipping at our heels. And I think, my lesson from Uber was that if you weren't in the market first or early, really hard to compete. And there were some markets where, the incumbent was still highly dominant, even, 3, 4 years after, and after a bunch of investment. And so we kind of had this like race, like this land grab, which we were able to do because capital back then was relatively cheap. And so it was a lot of geographic expansion. Since then, we've actually pulled back and really spent more time on our core markets. I'm a big believer that most marketplaces will be eventually winner take all, if not winner take most, if not winner take all. It's certainly, I would have not thought that in the ride sharing business, but like Lyft is, uh, I think gradually declining. I think food delivery is kind of TBD. I think DoorDash has done a phenomenal job in the US, and so they've got pretty big lead. So who knows where all these things end up? But I think, it is certainly a winner take most business, ours at least. And so we were pretty frantic and kind of a little bit disorganized around market expansion. But today we've we've really honed in on making sure that we can stick to our core markets, penetrate those, and then start moving to different markets. But we also now have the luxury of having much less competition. And I think that's like nuanced in everyone's unique businesses. And I don't know what kind of businesses everyone runs, but depending on the market you're in, it somewhat dictates how fast you need to go. And for some, I think it's probably faster than you'd like, but that's also the reality of the competitive environment.
Yeah, certainly a nuance when it comes to marketplaces. But it definitely sounds like you're taking on more of that kind of infrastructure and logistics as well, right? So not just kind of connecting buyers and sellers. So with that in mind, what all goes into launching a new market?
Yeah, so our launch model has changed. We used to go launch the full both sides of the marketplace at once. Today, we actually launch the supply side first. One, because it's just way less capital intensive. The infrastructure around the sales process, the logistics, all of that is much more simplified on the supply side, so we can deal with less people, frankly, and less space. And so that's where how we launch generally right now, where we do supply acquisition and then we sell that directly to wholesale buyers. And then as you start getting a critical velocity of supply acquisition, you can then move that more to the buy side. So start basically building a retail, so you can start building inventory. And so that's how our supply acquisition model, or sorry, our launch model has changed over time. And it seems to be working really well. So we just launched Vancouver that way, and we've done that for the last couple of months. And as we get to kind of critical velocity of supply acquisition, we can then start thinking about retail.
Got it. And also too, it sounds like there's lots of moving pieces, and I would say more complexity at the Clutch kind of compared to other marketplaces. So what is the team like today?
We've got about 400 people, and a variety of folks. We have vehicle inspectors, we have licensed mechanics and techs, we have shuttlers, we have delivery folks. Unfortunately, our product, there's no existing or at least no reliable existing infrastructure network that we can work on. So, most people can put their good in a box, right? Or, deliver a service. Like we can't put, unfortunately, USPS or FedEx haven't figured out a way to deliver cars yet. So we have to build our own logistics. So that's been challenging, but that's also part of the competitive moat, right? Like what we built around facilities, infrastructure, logistics, all the technology is just like a pretty deep competitive moat when it comes to competing against other more traditionally non-managed marketplaces. And our ability to arrange for financing, we can, because we own the entire value chain, we can also offer a 10-day money back guarantee, which like a traditional marketplace has a hard time doing. And so I think all of those things have been and are continue to be incredibly hard to build, but the hard to build things are what makes the marketplace and the moat just deeper and more defensible.
Certainly. So we're going to get into group questions here because I promised our founders we'd save some time. But right before we do, so you've of course raised from some pretty awesome investors, like you mentioned, FJ Labs. So what has the fundraising journey been like, and what are some of your key fundraising learnings?
Um, so we've raised I think something like 150 million of equity, and it's amazing how just market timing makes so much of the difference. I think we're now in like maybe call it some more of a normal market. I was in VC previously, and so I feel like that was a little bit of an unfair advantage because I kind of knew exactly what they were looking for and what exactly I should be saying. And for us early on, it was really about some of the product market fit, and making sure that you were delivering a really great customer experience. And so NPS is a core metric for us. We use it a lot within the organization. It's something we focus on heavily. Um, Customer feedback is super important too. We have plugins where we get in real time, like Slack notifications when a new review comes up, and that we post that to the entire company and everyone sees it. And if there's a 5-star, people are like, yay, which is nice. And if there's like, which is most of the time, I think we've got like something like 7, 8,000 5-star reviews, whatever. And then on the negative side, it also is an opportunity for folks like myself to chime in and like really dig into those issues. And so that was a big focus early on. We got lucky because we've got, I think we got lucky and unlucky because we were valued super high, and then the entire every VC and growth equity firm started souring on the business, and so people were questioning the business model, and with good luck, with rightfully so because of how terrible unit economics were back then. But then both ourselves and Harvana and some others have kind of fixed it and figured it out, and so now valuations are back up, and so I think we had the fortune of being, I would say, tied to a public comp that was helpful for at least determining where valuation should be and what like the pulse of the market looked like. And so we spent a lot of time with public market investors, particularly in our later rounds, and a lot of the funds, particularly in 2022 and 2023, were crossover investors. I would say, the kind of the key thing is about, whenever you're going in, it's emphasizing whatever competitive moat defensibility you have. Whether, I don't know, I don't know what kind of businesses people have, but to the extent there is some degree of like high defensibility, those are things that they will focus on. And then, your ability to scale and what lever you have to scale. For us, it's supply acquisition. And so if we pull that lever, then, we can, as long as you can then absorb that demand or that kind of influx of cars for us, then that translates into growth. And so that was a pretty big factor for us. But like I would say our fundraising journey has been somewhat atypical, and hopefully and just I would say influenced heavily by public markets.
Definitely worth noting. So I think those are going to be really helpful kind of learnings and tips for founders as well. So cool. We're going to get into the group Q&A. Hey, Dimitri, do you want to come on?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I'm an economist, and so whenever I hear this kind of a business model where there is an offer that a seller can choose to accept, I start really worried about like asymmetric information and kind of adverse selection. So presumably, a seller of a car has a lot of private information that's available to them, and so if you make them an offer, if it's a great offer, they and given the state of their car, they're going to accept it, and if it's not a great offer, then they're going to maybe sell it somewhere else. And so you kind of wind up with this that your inventory is maybe sort of kind of is of low quality, and so the kind of the market unravels. So I'm curious. So like real estate is another example where you have this kind of dynamic creep up
Yep.
and be sort of very destructive. So I'm curious what kind of product changes you've implemented that sort of keep this market from unraveling.
Yeah, so there's also fraud, right? Because car theft is a thing as well. So I mean, there's obviously tools that we've implemented there. For us, we also have they fill out the form and they put in their answers. There is a final check, a physical final check. So when you drop off the car, when you pick it up, you will do a final check of that vehicle. For us, and this is where when you own the reconditioning infrastructure like we do, and can recondition things at relatively low cost, then we have there's less issue like because we're at scale, the issues that do come up, we can fix them either you know, inexpensively, or we could just offload that car to a wholesale market. And so there is like some leakage that we assume, but at scale, we've found that it hasn't been an issue because, in the instances where there is something, they're rare and it kind of gets blended into our entire cost of acquisition. And so I think the final check is one thing, but again, I think this is where scale helps because if you can correct and fix those defects at a low cost. This is a great example of, at some point where, anything cosmetic is almost irrelevant because if you can do a paint and body on that car for, pretty cheap, then it doesn't matter. You can just, put it through that process and you basically have a fully brand new exterior, right? And so I think that's where we instead of focusing on that, we actually focus on how do we continue to make our production process more, and we call it production process, more efficient and more cost effective.
That's a great question. Hey, Molly, do you want to come on?
Yeah. I'm curious how you're adjusting your marketing strategy, if at all, to account for answer engines as opposed to your AI, as opposed to search engine optimization. Have you guys made any adjustments there?
Yeah, we have started to. I mean, I think the biggest thing is to be more of an authority on the internet, frankly. And so we've leaned heavily into PR, and try. I mean, I think some of the mechanisms that help you with SEO are also helpful for chat or sorry, for AI. I think we're still very early though. I think that the more traditional kind of aggregator marketplaces are probably more at threat, because if you think about what like these agentic operator type of um, bots that can go and like actually book me a hotel at this location for this price, and they go and they find the best deals and then they just book it for you, like that to me poses a threat to like some of the more like hotel aggregator, like those kind of like platforms, like what's the need for that in 3, 4, 5 years. I think because we are still like the source of the product, we're a little bit more insulated from that. And I think the easy kind of high level answer is just like become and continue to be an authority on like one, deliver a great customer experience so that the reviews and like any information that's available on you on the internet is high. And then the more kind of like brand recognition you have and the more link backs you have, probably are the right things to do, at least for now.
Awesome. That was a great question. Hey, Dan, I actually had a question that a founder sent me in advance, wanted me to ask, and it was around your MBA partnership. So could you maybe share a little bit more about the role partnerships play and how you think about that for Clutch?
For us, it was really about building trust. You've got a pretty expensive product. Our average ASP for cars is something like $28,000, and so you've got Canadian, so it's like less for the US. So you got you've got someone that has never heard of your brand, right? Is trying to buy or sell a product to them. And so having the NBA partnership was helpful for building trust. It's amazing how easily someone can be convinced, and rightfully so, probably. But if you're selling a car and you're like, "Hey, like, is this a scam? This sounds too good to be true," and you'd be like, "Well, we're actually the official used car partner of the NBA." They're like, "Oh, okay, well, that seems that seems fine. I'll go ahead with my, continue to go ahead with my purchase or sale." And so again, it was really more about brand building and trust. We actually initially partnered with the NHL, but the demographic and like from the brand fit better with NBA, so we pivoted towards the NBA. But similar results and similar reasoning, um, and really again, kind of back to that kind of fundamental trust building exercise that we were trying to do.
Hey, Noah, do you want to come on? Please send me a question.
Hi, my name is Noah. Any advice for managing growth and being capital efficient when scaling into new markets and trying to become a leader in that market where competitors are kind of arriving as well?
So I spent a lot of time thinking about this like shifting of growth versus profitability slash efficiency. I think it's probably the number one hardest thing to do as a startup leader or founder. The framework I use for that is building on an S curve, and so you I have a I try to have a really strong pulse on where elements of the business are breaking and deliberately pause growth when I feel like those things are breaking. We've grown at 100% CAGR over the last 6 years. And so every time a business doubles, something breaks. And so everybody, not something breaks, everything breaks, right? Like your org structures, some of your software, your systems, your processes, people's capabilities, like, you double the quantity of things that you put through your system, things are going to break. And so, you go through that, let's say you've doubled, then it's like a really good time to just basically like consciously throughout the organization stop growth. Like just be like, hey, look, like this is a good start time to like we're almost like we've doubled over the last three or 4 months, and right now you can feel things that are breaking right now, and so this is like, okay, look at some of these efficiency metrics, spend more time around efficiency, around like, cost per head count, cost per activity, cost whatever your metric is for efficiency, and have the organization focus on those, because it's really, really, really hard to do growth and profitability, or growth and efficiency at the same time. It's almost like you could try, but invariably you're gonna just end up landing on one of them. So just why fight it? Just be more conscious and deliberate about it, and you take the time to then fix those. Like right now, if we wanted to grow the business 2x, it would be a disaster, like, and not in a good way. And so, until the time we're going to spend over the next literally 3 months is going to be about fixing some of the fundamental things, taking stock of the processes that aren't working really well, and then using that to then get there, fix those things, and then hopefully double again off of that base.
It's a great question. Hey, Dan, I actually had another question that a founder sent me, and it was around, thinking through like as a managed marketplace, like the value add potentially there, and the cost and risk that you take on as a marketplace as well. So, do you maybe have a tips for earlier stage marketplace founders that are thinking through that and how managed they should maybe be?
I think in this new world, like the world of just like traditional marketplaces is dead. Maybe that's controversial, but like I think consumers now just demand more trust, more certainty, more customer service, higher quality, and the days of just like a traditional buyer connect seller are dead. Um, and so my view, I'm a big believer in owning as much as you can around that value chain. And so I think about like I own all the logistics. Like I want to get into like consumer finance and start like we lend off our balance sheet right now, right? Like, and the reason we do that is because we can offer a better product. And all these things eventually like go into offering a better product and a better customer experience, but it also results in just a much more it's a much more difficult model to disrupt when you've got full vertical integration. And we can almost take every line of our expense base and eventually see a path where that could be a revenue opportunity, almost in the same way Amazon looks at their cost structure. And so I am, as I kind of continue to build, I'm very much focused on owning everything. um but that comes with like enormous complexity. And so at the same time, like, yes, I want to own everything, but it's like, the discussion today is like, have we bitten off more than it can chew? There's that classic, adage of startups don't die of starvation. They die of indigestion. And so, like, the balance is like making sure you're not getting indigestion. And so, um, I would say prioritize the things that are the most value add to the customer experience and where those friction points may or may not be, and focus on those things. But my opinion of marketplaces generally is that you need to have some component that is pretty owned, pretty vertically integrated, so you can actually deliver that better customer experience.
Yeah. Kind of a point that we're always mentioning is the importance of sequencing with that, right? So not taking on
Yep.
too much too early. Well, cool. So we're almost out of time here, but really appreciate you taking the time to join us here today and share about all of your awesome experience early at Uber Eats and now with Clutch. And so we really appreciate it. And I actually had a one last kind of closing question that I like to ask, which is if you could go right back before you joined Uber Eats and entered the world of marketplaces, what would you tell yourself about them?
I would tell myself it's a good decision, because if you can build a good one, it's pretty hard to disrupt. And then probably be more I would say deliberate and observant around where, well, and you get this advice all the time, but like, you got to focus on one side, which side you need to focus on. Um, and I think I probably made the mistake early on focusing on the buy side, at least at Clutch, more than the supply side. And I think that was probably wrong. And so I think being more, and maybe maybe it was right at the time, but then continuously and consistently re-examining that to really truly understand how that dynamic is working. Because I think you can go down a path where you have one set of beliefs, but given how the marketplace evolves, your beliefs change. And so I think for a long time, I don't think, at Uber even, we really truly appreciated how much supply mattered, like restaurant selection mattered. And, eventually we started building and spending a lot more time doing analysis around like conversion based on the number of restaurants you saw. So we would draw these conversion curves based on like, if you saw 50 restaurants while your conversion, it started to tail off at around 50, 60. But basically it was a straight line vertical. With every restaurant you added, conversion would go up, right? um I think, like, because of Uber's DNA, you might have like actually focused more on like reliability and like delivery time, right? Where the true driver of the conversion was actually like, is the restaurant you want to go to or eat from actually on the app?
Well, cool. And then last but not least, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at and follow along?
Me personally, I mean, I do post on LinkedIn every once in a while. I'm on Twitter, but not as active as I could be. But yeah, generally to do a decent amount of LinkedIn posting and try to provide some thoughts there.
Awesome. Well, I'll include a link, and I'm sure you'll have lots of marketplace founders coming your way. So we really appreciate taking the time to join us here again today for the group chat, and thanks everyone for the questions.